Just for the sake of time, I think it's going to be great to jump officially into the cast. Welcome, everyone who is here. We are going to be breaking down whether or not we think the Switch era of Pokemon was good or not compared to past generations, standing on its own, and a variety of other topics within that. I know that, and this is actually suggested by our guest, Mags. Um, First of all, what I would love to do is ask you to introduce yourself, and on top of that, since we are a little low on people right now, Caps, our producer of sorts, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well in just a moment, you definitely can. I am your humble host, Roadhawk, Roadie, Road, whatever you want to call me, but please jump in with that, Mags.
Me? I thought you were gonna have Caps go first.
I'm happy to have whoever.
Well, I'm the special guest, I guess. But yeah, I'm Magnadeth. I am a former editor-in-chief of Bulbapedia from 2010 to 2012, and I still just kind of hang around Bulbagarden as kind of sort of an unspecified, you know, executive staff position or whatever. I don't really think I have an official position these days, but just like to go around, help people out, and still like to keep the wiki, looking good and running.
So, and then Caps, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would love to. Thank you. My name's the Caps fan. You can call me Caps. I am a Twitch streamer here on the Twitch channel. I also do forum administration over on the forums. And I guess my official title is Deputy Multimedia Executive. So I'm second in command behind ME around everything having to do with Twitch and YouTube. Great to be here. I can't talk today, apparently.
Awesome. Really quickly, one thing that we did want to break into, which I think is a great idea, is to explore our own personal experiences with the Pokemon company, with the games as a whole, what pulled us into it, and where we think the current status of the games is, and how it's holding up. Really quickly, to pull my put 2 cents in, I think that the Switch era has some genuine uniqueness, but I will get into why in a little bit as we develop. Personally, this is not my favorite era of the games, but I do really appreciate it. I actually started playing when I was, oh goodness, how old was I? I think I was like 7 years old when I'm not Black and White. I wouldn't have been then. When Red and Blue came out in the United States, and I would say I was a diehard fan. I will always say that the 3DS era is one of my favorite eras of Pokemon. And to this day, I'm really hoping, especially because this is part of the reason why we are covering this with the Switch 2 announced that it's going to be coming out in 2025. I really hope that the Pokemon Company can take some of their creativity and momentum and really launch a very solid generation of Pokemon. But I would love to check in with Caps. I'm going to go to you this time and see what you think.
So the question is, what's your history with Pokemon, and how do you think the Switch era compares?
Absolutely.
So I actually have kind of an interesting history with Pokemon. I didn't start out as a fan of the games at all. I started out as a fan of the TCG because a lot of my friends in school collected cards. We'd trade them, and we would never actually play the game because we didn't know how it worked. But we'd collect cards and trade cards, and it was a lot of fun. Then eventually I ended up with a Game Boy Advance for, I can't remember, it was like it must have been 6th or 7th birthday, alongside a copy of Pokemon Fire Red. And so the rest is history from there. Comparatively to other generations of games, I would say that in a way the Switch era is a little bit better than the 3DS era. But overall, I would say it's probably does not hold up to the variety. Maybe not in terms of variety, because I do think that. Oh my god, that was a big alert. Do that in a second, Taylor. The Switch era doesn't necessarily not compare in terms of variety, but in terms of consistent quality across that variety, I would say that the Switch era is definitely lacking compared to what I would consider the golden era, which was the DS era.
I think there's a lot of truth there. And then, Magnadeth, what do you think? And where do you come from?
So the year is 1998. It is fresh after my birthday in September. And I go to the store with my money, all my birthday money, and I'm going to buy a brand new Game Boy game. And I walk up there and I see these new Pokemon games in the glass case. And what do I buy? Red or blue? No, I buy Final Fantasy Legend for the Game Boy. And it was terrible. So I actually returned it and I bought Pokemon Blue version in 1998. And I have been playing ever since, except for a brief period. Actually, it wasn't that brief, but after Gen 2, I was not interested in Ruby or Sapphire, so I skipped them. And I kind of came back with Leaf Green because I'm like, hey, this is the game I played when I was a kid. So playing that, I was like, man, this is pretty cool. I ended up getting the DS games, went back and played Ruby Sapphire, and I've been kind of stuck in the Pokemon series ever since then. So I've played all the games, all the generations. And so on that basis, what do I think the Switch era has been to the Pokemon series? Oh boy. Kind of a mess, if I'm honest. What's that?
Oh, go ahead. I thought you were done.
No, I thought I disconnected for a second, actually. But yeah, I think that the Switch era has it. We've got some ups and we've got some real far downs, which we're going to talk about in tonight's stream. And I don't honestly think I could give you a blanketed answer of how I think the Switch era is, because I think it's too varied in what it has meant to us as fans.
All right. I like both opinions. I would love to kind of build on this, in which kind of an impromptu question. I know that there have been a lot of mentions of different eras of Pokemon, but I would love to check in with both of you and ask what your favorite experience with your favorite game, like, to narrow it down, what is your favorite game on your favorite Pokemon console and why? And I will open this up to whoever would like to go first.
Caps, you go first. I got to think about this one.
So, what was your favorite era of Pokemon and why?
What was your favorite game on your favorite console and why?
Favorite game on my favorite console and why? My favorite game is probably Pokemon Black and White. The reason being, well, of course, the main reason being, it's the one that I have the most core memories with and the most nostalgia for. I would argue that whatever Pokemon game is your favorite is most likely the one that you grew up with. And that's just no different for me. But I also like the increased focus on story. I am a fan of the fact that you can't use any returning Pokemon or anything, which is, that might be a hot take, but I like being able to start. I'm glad. I like being able to start brand new with a new team of Pokemon that I've never seen before. I also liked the way the region was designed, even though it wasn't necessarily perfect with stuff like the Black City and the White Forest. I did like that it kind of felt like you were coming full circle around the region, pun literally intended. So, yeah.
Well, and I'll jump in here for just a second. I will say that I agree, nostalgia. I have always loved Black and White 2. I think I like Black and White 2 just a little bit more, even though it's a continuation of the story. But I do have to add, for my young mind when Black and White came out, just the graphics jump from Diamond and Pearl for me when I first crossed that bridge. I think into Castelia City. I can't remember the name of
Mhm.
that massive city.
Yep.
But when I saw that, my brain as a young kid went, "Holy cow!" Because I thought that was truly innovative. And I will say, I do think that I really like the fact that Black and White and Black and White 2 um, had some really innovative story ideas. I know those games have always kind of sparked the well, is, Pokemon essentially the dog fighting of its universe, which people have their opinions on. Um, but one thing I did want to do really quickly is just announce that we have our other guest, Abby, who Abby does Pixels, who has been on previously, who has jumped on. And I just really want to quickly ask you, Abby, um, what pulled you into Pokemon and why do you continue to
Yeah,
play?
so I actually originally got into Pokemon because my brother got some of the games as a Christmas gift, and he got both Sun and Moon and was only going to play one of them. So I picked up Sun at that point, and liked it enough. I wasn't like super crazy about it at that point, but I kept up with it from there. And then as I kind of got more into it, I went back to a lot of the older games and found that those were all also very good, and just kind of kept up with that. Most of my experience with Pokemon was more so the creature designs, the Pokemon themselves, than any of the particular games. Although obviously I still enjoy and play the games, but yeah.
Awesome. And then, just in case you did miss, we were just breaking down our favorite game on our favorite generation or console, if you want. And I can definitely give you a moment to think about that as we go to Magnadeath.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned favorite console because my favorite console is the N64, which is not really known for Pokemon games other than Pokemon Stadium and Snap, and I love both of those games. But the answer I'm going to give instead is, and this might actually be kind of this is kind of an unpopular take, I think, but stepping into Kanto or knowing I could go to Kanto after finishing the story of Gold and Silver was amazing to me when I was a kid. Knowing that there was an entire second region to explore after Elite Four was it blew my mind, and I loved it so much. And people say, ah, but it's so stripped down, it's super unbalanced. I'm like, I don't care. Like you don't understand the the amazing feeling of, yep, I've beaten the Elite Four, I've got my team, we made it all the way here, I'm the champion now, and the game's like, nah, you're not done yet. That was a great feeling.
I think that is completely fair. I will say one of my all-time favorite parts of playing through the Johto games was, in my supreme lack of Pokemon knowledge at the time, bringing Eradicate to the Elite Four and being able to effectively use it against Lance has kind of cemented my love of that rat boy ever since. Um, and I'm sure part of that is due to the level scaling, but that was a great joy in my life. And then, Abby, do you have any opinions on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a whole, the 3DS games are really what stands out to me. Those were a lot of the first games I played, and so they kind of stand out in that way. But I've gone back to them over time, especially having played a lot of the older stuff too, and I think they still hold up. We'll get to my general all-time favorite Pokemon game later, but my favorite main series game is ORAS. I think primarily because of the way that it manages to blend a lot of the, at that time, more modern features with kind of the classic Pokemon style that I found that I also enjoyed from the older games.
Wonderful. And then the next thing that I really wanted to dive into is the idea that I think we've all touched on to some degree some frustration with the Nintendo Switch era of games. And speaking of and kind of carrying over this topic, which is, and I've touched on it a little bit too. Do you think that the Switch era of Pokemon games actually has some unique charm to it? We've all touched on this a little bit. I will mention again, I think there's some really unique ideas within this console generation. But I would actually love to go to Abby on this, and if you would want, you can mention the game that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so I am generally quite a big fan of most of the Switch Pokemon games. I mean, probably a good 2/3 of my total playtime in the franchise is split between Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet. But yeah, the game that like my all-time favorite Pokemon game, like across the main series and all the spin-offs, is New Pokemon Snap. And so just like that especially is so different from everything else we have on Switch and had in a while. Like, I mean, the only other Snap game was on the N64. And even then, like, they changed so much, it truly feels like a very unique and fresh experience. So that is like really what I remember the Switch generation for. But I think obviously the jump to more of an open world style is definitely going to keep influencing the franchise as it goes forward. And you know that really started in Sword and Shield and got fleshed out in Scarlet and Violet. So alongside kind of Legends Arceus in there, kind of bridging the gap. But I think I think this will definitely be remembered as like kind of that stepping stone and the first time we really saw, I think, major innovation in the franchise in quite some time.
And then, because you were such a fan of New Pokemon Snap, did you honestly ever see a game like this hitting the Nintendo Switch at all?
So the announcement for New Pokemon Snap was the first time I had heard of the original Pokemon Snap. So
What?
you gotta remember, I'm a baby when it comes to this franchise. Like
Oh,
Gen 7 were my first games. Like
goodness.
I've gone back to it now, but at the time I was unfamiliar. But
I can feel
And I
death
think
cringing from all the way over here.
I gotta go to you, Magna Death. You had such a response to that. I feel like there's gotta be some stuff said there.
I mean, I have 2 copies of Pokemon Snap for N64. I love Pokemon Snap N64, and I've been begging for years and years and years for a remake. So the fact that we actually got one on Switch finally, and the fact that it's actually like a really good game, is so nice. I'm so glad we got such a great game. From a series, I say series in quotation marks, that I thought was we would never see it again. I thought, no, they're going to leave that in the past. We're going to forget about it. But no, we got New Pokemon Snap. I don't like the name. I think the name is terrible, but the game is fantastic. So, oh man, I haven't even finished yet, which I feel embarrassed about though.
Adding to that, I will say I'm right there with you. I'm a massive fan of the original Pokemon Snap. I will say this is something I never saw them do, and I think this goes to Abby's comment about some genuine innovation happening in this era. And I think that I do agree there is so much innovation, so much uniqueness, so much new that makes Pokemon on the Switch unique. And the franchise needs that. We've had so much copy and paste for so long. But I just wanted to check, Caps. Did we get a notification from anyone in the Twitch chat? Because we will also have points throughout this cast to reference those, but I know we got a big one, it seemed.
Yeah, it was just a general question. What is our opinion on Lapras?
It's a water ice type.
Just in general, or in any specific game?
Just in general. Just in general.
So I will be honest, I haven't used Lapras a whole lot in any Pokemon game, partly because when I was first introduced to it, was red and blue, and I got it so late that I couldn't use it. However, I will be honest and reference the anime for a bit here and say that when Ash's Lapras left in the anime, I think I probably did cry, and it still chokes me up a little bit. I will also say I love the fact that the Pokemon games have basically said that that thing has gone from almost extinct to so overpopulated in the Alola region, which is one of my favorite regions, that it's problematic. I just love that switch. But I would love to actually, Caps, you didn't get to jump in on the other question, but what do you feel like?
How do I feel about Lapras? I will, to tie things back into the previous little tidbit about Snap, I do like how Lapras was utilized in the original Snap, how you kind of see it in the background, and then you kind of like how, I can't remember exactly how it works, but like you have to like,
you have to take pictures of it.
Yeah, you have to take pictures of it, and then it gets closer and closer and closer, so you get the best picture of it. Yeah. So I don't know, I like that. And I also want to shout out Lapras in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers Sky, who has a very, very important place in the plot in that game.
I'll play Mystery Dungeon one of these days.
You absolutely should.
Right. Magnedeath, do you want to say anything other than what you said about Lapras?
That it's a water ice type? Lapras exists in a very interesting point to my psyche, if you will, because being that I'm from Gen 1, it was this, secret Pokemon that you got from some dude in Silphco, and that was the only one you could have. And then even in Gen 2, it was, the secret Pokemon hidden in, I think it's Mount Mortar? No. Dark Cave? Something like that. It's Union Cave. It's in Union Cave.
Yeah.
And it's only available on like Friday nights or something like that. So Lapras was always like this oddly special Pokemon, and I think it's fine. It's a bulky water ice type. It's fine. It doesn't appeal to my playstyle, so I don't have much of an opinion on it. I'll put it that way. Like, it's fine. I like it as a Pokemon that fleshes out Pokemon as a franchise, as a series, and I love Pokemon that do that. Like, they don't necessarily have to be the best thing, but if they fill a niche in the series, then it gives them purpose, for lack of a better term, outside of them even existing as a Pokemon. So it's a great Pokemon for the background. It's a good Pokemon for the foreground. It's a Pokemon that exists for the benefit of the series.
A lot of truth there. I actually, speaking of that, I think Alola also has used Lapras as Surf, which is something else that makes me happy, but I don't want to gush too much. Abby, what about you?
Yeah, Lapras is one of those Pokemon to me. It's like, I really like it from a design perspective, but it just shows up so late in every game it's in that I have never gotten the chance to actually use one. Usually by the time I'm hitting kind of the third or fourth gym, my team is pretty much set. And so when Pokemon are locked away so late in the game, it makes it a very difficult sell for me to use them. And Lapras, water types are a dime a dozen, so it never really stood out enough to me to bother replacing something to use it. But I do really like it from a design perspective, and in the games where it plays a more active role as opposed to just being a Pokemon you can catch, I think it definitely suits its job there. Like, it being a surf Pokemon is like, it is the surf Pokemon, and I think that's really cool. But I have very little experience with it in the context of the actual games and on a team.
Those are some really good points.
I agree. I will say, just for the last bit of this, because I don't want this to be the Lapras cast, but I will say I love G-Max Lapras's design. I think it's really cool. I wish it was a little bit more permanent. I have some problems with the G-Max whole thing a little bit myself, which we can get to actually right now, because I think that's a great transition, which is on the Switch. Do you prefer Gen 8 or Gen 9?
9.
9? Yeah. We got a definitive answer there. Abby, what about you?
It's tough for me. I think I, as a whole, do prefer Gen 8 simply because there's more than one set of games in them. Like I like Sword and Shield. I like Scarlet and Violet more than I do Sword and Shield. But then Gen 8 also has BDSP and Legends Arceus, which not the most popular opinion, but I think BDSP especially is like still quite good. And then all the spin-offs that came in Gen 8 too. I mean, we haven't truly outside of Scarlet and Violet, we haven't gotten a ton in Gen 9, and those games aren't good enough to outweigh everything else from Gen 8 in my opinion.
Can I jump in for a moment?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Because I said 9, and I need to clarify that I jumped to a bit of a conclusion because I forgot that Legends Arceus is considered Gen 8, and I also kind of mistook New Snap for being Gen 8 because I feel like those games are so different that my brain has almost disassociated with them with generations as a whole. And that's kind of going to be a thing that, as this discussion continues, will be more obvious.
I will agree. I think that's fair. I have a hard time with Legends Arceus as well, just from the fact that because of Paradox Pokemon, my brain associates the old Hisuian Pokemon with Paradox Pokemon and makes me think it's Gen 9. So I'm right there with you. Before I jump in, though, I want to also pass this back to Caps. Get your take on this.
So, Gen 8 or Gen 9? I think this is a really odd question to ask because we haven't really had much of Gen 9 yet. It's mostly just been Scarlet and Violet. So I feel like I need to compare if we're gonna compare the whole Generation 8 to just Scarlet and Violet, I would have to say Generation 8 because it does have several of my favorite Pokemon games in it, being the remake of Mystery Dungeon 1 and Pokemon Legends Arceus in particular. But if we're comparing strictly on the basis of main series games, I would say that I actually prefer Gen 9 to Gen 8. I think that Gen 9, although it has some technical flaws, is a step forward and a step in the right direction towards what Gen 8 was trying to do. And I'm very interested to see how things shake out as the generation continues and as we get new main series games, how those main series games will build upon Scarlet and Violet in similar ways to how Scarlet and Violet built upon Sword and Shield.
I think there's a lot of truth there as well. I will jump in, and I'm strictly speaking, Gen 8 as Sword and Shield, and Scarlet and Violet as Gen 9. I will say, I lean towards Scarlet and Violet just because I feel like the characters was so much more fleshed out, in my honest opinion. I will always to this day have a little bit of bitterness in Scarlet and Violet for making us save Arven's Mabostiff and then like have the emotional whiplash of, okay, now you fight the dog you just spent the entire game saving.
I never thought about that.
Yeah. And as all joking aside, I will also say, despite my frustrations with Gen 9, one of the biggest ones being the cities feeling so dull, in so many ways, which I still to this day, please Pokemon Gen 10, allow us to enter buildings again, please. I will say I like Gen 9. What do you say?
Oh, I was just agreeing with you.
Okay. I will also say one of my biggest frustrations with Gen 9 though, and we'll get into the aspect of this for everyone else in a moment. I feel like oh goodness. The Paldea region has some really unique things to it that I absolutely love. but I would have loved more biomes and more like vibrancy. Part of the reason I love Alola is that region in my mind feels so alive with colors and people and things. And Scarlet and Violet, just there's so much that feels a little lifeless to me in it that it makes it really hard. Although it is, I will say, one of the better Pokemon games you've gotten in a long time. With that, though, diving into that, because again, wonderful segue, I would love to check in with the opinions on the graphics between these two regions, because as much as I love Scarlet and Violet, I get a little nauseous playing that game sometimes with the graphics and things. But, Magdeath, would you like to be the first one to talk about this?
I would, because I'm gonna mirror your thoughts and mention that I had to stop playing Scarlet and Violet for a period of time because the game it ran so poorly that it would make me nauseous, and I do not have issues with visuals. This is one of the first times in my entire life where I played a video game that it actually made me uncomfortable to play because the performance was so bad. And I grew up playing old game consoles. I mentioned I love my Nintendo 64, which runs at like 15 FPS. So I'm thinking, what's the problem here? And I realized the problem, in my opinion, is that the game fluctuates the FPS so inconsistently, where it'll be 30 FPS 1 second and then 10 the next second. And then it'll be 20 and then it'll go back to 10 and 30. It's all over the place. And I had to stop playing for a while. And when I finally did go back to playing it, I could only play it in, let's say, 2 hours at the most. And don't get me wrong, 2 hours is a good amount of time. But I mean, I could sit down and play a game for 5, 6, 8 hours if I want to. So the fact that I couldn't play more than 2 hours at a time for me personally, it kind of hammers home just how uncomfortable I was with the performance of that game. And I feel how, to be honest, totally unacceptable the performance of Scarlet and Violet is.
There's some harsh truths there. Caps, I know you and I have a lot of similarities in what we love of the games, but what do you feel about the graphics compared to Galar and Paldea?
So for the graphics in particular, I think I prefer Sword and Shield's graphics. And now I understand that there's a lot of criticism for Sword and Shield's graphics. Obviously, like it's the funny thing to do to make fun of, the N64 level textured trees and all the, bland color palette and stuff. But one thing I will give to Sword and Shield is that the graphics there work. They're not beautiful, they're not even good looking, but they work. They're consistent. With Scarlet and Violet's graphics rather, I feel like things pop out, like the colors pop out a little too much. That certain things just look just weird and they don't belong, and nothing is smooth. Everything is really, kind of like geometrical, and it's very clear that Scarlet and Violet, in terms of graphics, was pushed out before it was ready, because that's kind of how games in development look, are very geometric, and the color palettes aren't finished yet and whatnot. So Sword and Shield, for all of the crap that we give them, at least the style was consistent and something that doesn't hurt my eyes.
Not a lot of truth there as well. And then Abby, what about you?
Yeah, so I generally am a lot less harsh when it comes to the graphics of these games compared to some people, but so I didn't have a ton of issue in my own personal experience playing either of these games, but I definitely understand why people would have issues with it. I think Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet both have exceedingly bad execution of their graphics, but I think Sword and Shield has an interesting art style at the very least. Scarlet and Violet, to me, has a pretty bland art style and all of those performance issues, which is something that I struggle with. Like I enjoy those games, but they're just not interesting to look at. Like even when Sword and Shield isn't running particularly well, like especially kind of the wild area, you still get some interesting views here and there. And then you have all of the non-wild area routes. And so all of those routes look nice. And then the towns and cities, especially in that game, look wonderful. And everything in Scarlet and Violet is so bland and uninteresting to me that at the very least, like if it ran well, I could be like, okay, well it does the job. But to me it is boring and poorly optimized, which is not a great combination.
If I could kind of add on to what everybody was saying and what I said, um, Pokemon games have always been pretty solid in terms of how they play with their reliability. So to play Scarlet and Violet and have it be such a mess it's disappointing to me as a longtime fan, because sure, Pokemon games have had glitches, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know, how many times did I get infinite rare candies in Pokemon Blue? But in all those previous games, glitches were the sort of thing you had to go out of your way to do. Whereas Scarlet and Violet, it is in your face potentially constantly. You know, we've all had different experiences, and that's kind of the problem, is that different experiences is it seems like there's just a multitude of different ways this game can break, and you never know what's going to happen next. Part of me says, hey, that's kind of exciting. Another part of me says this game needed more time in the oven.
Just because I think there is so much truth being said, and I think we all agree there are downsides to in the Switch era, but I'd love to try to change the tone a little bit and possibly highlight some of Switch's better qualities. And the first question I really have is the idea of the Switch's mobility and how it allows players to play, and that, like, the things that make the Switch special. I will honestly say that I'm still the person who, even though I can take the Switch out of my house and play it, I'm still paranoid that I'm going to drop my backpack or drop my satchel and the game's going to break. But I will say, speaking for myself, I love the idea of just getting away from a TV and traveling that easily. But with that, I would love to ask, Abby, you first. Do you feel like the Switch era's mobility and ease of access, in terms of how it can be used, not necessarily finding one, do you think it actually helps the games in any way?
So this is a really interesting topic for me because sort of that was where Pokemon was before. Pokemon has always been a handheld series. Outside of spin-offs, all the main series games have been on handhelds up until the Switch. And so that hybrid nature, I think, cut both ways. In one sense, like the Switch being a combination handheld and home console allowed Pokemon games to, while still maintaining their portability, go a little bit above and beyond in terms of kind of the complexity and things we were able to see. Like there was no way that Scarlet and Violet would exist, even as poorly as it runs now. There's no way it would exist on a purely handheld system. And so I think that is a net positive. However, I think handheld games, like if I'm just like sitting on the couch or whatever and playing, that's fine. One of the things I did a lot with like my 3DS especially was like I would be playing it like while I was out and about, like I was on a walk and like playing like X and Y at the same time. And because of these bigger 3D environments, that's much harder to do for me. And so I think that's a bit of a negative. But that is also one of those situations where I think having a much more traditionally styled game in BDSP is a net positive, because that is a much more quote unquote normal more handheld style Pokemon game, which I think the Switch desperately needed compared to Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet and Legends Arceus, which were all really trying to kind of push the series forward in more of a home console direction.
I think there's a lot of truth there as well. I will agree. I know there's a lot of hate on BDSB, and we've had a lot of talks and conversations over the last several months. I will say one thing as well. I do think that BDSP has a lot of charm to it. But Caps, what about you?
Yeah, honestly, echoing a lot of Abby's thoughts. I think that the Switch being a home console that you can take on the go is something that we take for granted now, having existed in the Switch generation for the past 7-ish years now. That being said, when it comes to Pokemon specifically, I don't necessarily know if the mobility of the Switch console itself really adds anything new to the franchise that hasn't existed, in previous eras. Because, like Abby said, all of the main series games, bar, whether you want to call XD Coliseum main series, whatever, right? But most of the main series games that people consider main series have all been handheld already. If anything, I think the mobility of the Switch does a good job continuing that kind of style. But I don't necessarily think it adds anything to it. In the same way that the mobility of the Switch adds new experiences and new capabilities for other mostly home console style games.
And then Magneteth, what about you?
I agree with what Caps was saying there. Because long story short, this is a bad question for me because I almost never play my Switch out of its dock. If I'm going somewhere, then I have something to do. So I live in the middle of nowhere, so I'm probably driving somewhere, so I can't play it in the car because I'm the driver. So my Switch only leaves its dock if I know for a fact I'm going somewhere where I'm going to be sitting for a period of time. Which is pretty rare, I'm going to be honest. But that's not really different to me than previous because all the previous Pokemon games, I've probably played them at home more than on the road. However, my input on this is that I don't think the modern Pokemon games are different enough that they can't be played on the go compared to at home. With the exception of Pokemon Let's Go, which is hugely different if you're not sitting in front of a TV with your Joy-Cons in your hands.
And I think this is a great point. So I originally had this down as just the 3DS and the Switch, but that's probably a big part of my bias feeling that question. But I would love to touch on, and I think we've got a great group to touch on different consoles, but comparing the Switch to other consoles, for me, I would say I would compare it to the DS or 3DS. But in that, what do you think really holds up better in terms of experience, play, and well, even add accessibility? And then Abby, we'll go with you first.
Yeah, so I definitely do prefer I think the experience of playing Pokemon on the 3DS. And I think I saw it in the chat earlier. They were talking about like how it does feel like a lot of the Switch games are designed for being played docked, and so it can be kind of difficult to make things out on the smaller screen. Whereas a lot of the older games, yes, were perhaps technically like lower resolution and that kind of thing, but they were designed around that, and so that in terms of accessibility, I think especially that makes a big difference. But then also just in general, I think like I think especially it's not talked about a ton, but I think the nature of the dual screens helped the DS and 3DS Pokemon games a lot. When you think about sort of X and Y, Diamond Pearl Platinum, Gen 4. A lot of those games use the bottom screen in a lot of interesting ways and we saw this with like BDSP when those were remade, like working around that got difficult. And so that is one thing that I don't see talked about a lot, but I think makes more of a difference than people realized.
I think there are some great points. I do also want to add that we are getting close to one of our times to go through some chat. And so if you're on Twitch or if you're listening to the port on YouTube, please leave comments. Join in on the conversation because in just a little bit we'll be going through that, talking with that. So if you have questions as well, feel free to ask them. But I'm actually going to go to Magna Death on this one.
I generally agree with what Abby was saying. Is growing up with the Game Boy, between the first 3 generations, the only major difference was if you had a Game Boy Advance SP and you had a backlight. Other than that, they're pretty much functionally the same. It wasn't until we got that touchscreen that it made the games so much easier to use. And there was great accessibility because you could touch the move you wanted to use, or you could use the D-pad if you wanted. If I really had to, narrow it down between DS and 3DS, it's actually kind of hard to do because it depends on the game. Gen 4 still used the grid pattern as Gen 5. So the track, or whatever you want to call it, the movement joystick disc of the 3DS wasn't really important. But, we got to use that in X and Y. So I don't really honestly think I could pick between the two. But I honestly think that playing on the DS and 3DS is better than playing on the Switch. Simply because everything is right there. You can just click the move you want to use and off you go. As opposed to sitting in my living room with my controller, which is no different than playing with a Game Boy. It's just the screen is, in front of me instead of, in my hand.
And just because you are such a fan of the Nintendo 64, I've got to ask, it's a Nintendo 64 all the way for you, is it?
I mean, within reason. Are you talking about like in terms of controls? Because it's kind of hard to compare. There wasn't really any games on the 64 that for Pokemon anyway. If you're asking if I like the controller, yes, I love the N64 controller. And anybody who doesn't is wrong.
Okay. I love that strong opinion. Caps, what about you?
Specifically, wait, can we re-say the question? Sorry, I was talking in chat.
Absolutely. So comparing the Nintendo Switch to past generations.
Right. So yeah, I really want to echo Abby as well as Sharking in chat about the dual screen. The dual screens being particularly very good for Pokemon. Whether it's UI improvements like having your moves and whatnot on the bottom screen, or unique features like the Seagear or the Poketch, or like Pokemon Ami. I think that just in general having the dual screens really work with a game like Pokemon, and also helps, especially thinking about Gen 6, as kind of the Nintendo's handhelds moved into a more online focused kind of setup. Having that social aspect included on the bottom screen, whereas you're playing the main part of the game on the top screen, adds to kind of the engagement and whatnot, with regards to like Pokemon as a social concept as well, which I think the Switch kind of loses a little bit. Obviously, they tried with the seeing empty player avatars in the wild area, as well as having the union rooms, which I do think are a positive in Scarlet and Violet. Union rooms are very cool. But I do think they lost a little bit of the kind of smoothness that comes along with having the dual screen on the Switch as opposed to the DS and 3DS.
Just a couple things I will add. One, I think part of the reason I gravitate to the 3DS is the durability of consoles around that time. Like 3DS was definitely an era where it was getting a little bit more fragile in use. But I think part of the reason I love Pokemon on older consoles is like I still have my 3DS. I still have my DS, my DSi. I still have my Game Boy and my Game Boy Advanced, and they work. And I think part of it for me that takes away from the Switch is that fear of breaking it. If I got too excited or something, which is, due to my neurodiverse brain and all that, and some very real realities of breaking consoles. And I also want to say, I feel like this point, I feel like something that really is telling. We haven't even mentioned the Wii U at all, which I'll be honest with you, I haven't thought of the Wii U in like probably a year and a half.
Do we have to mention the Wii U?
I don't think we do. I don't know many people who actually played it, but I do want to do what I promised though, and if we have to jump back to this, we can. I want to give some time for any comments, questions that appeared in chat.
Hang on.
Yes.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but you just gave me an idea.
Okay.
And it just dawned on me. So I'll make this quick so we can get on to the chat questions. But there was a great video on YouTube, don't remember, it doesn't matter, about how underutilized the Wii U is. And it just dawned on me, how perfect would it have been to have a Pokemon game on the Wii U? You would have your touch second screen right in your lap while the game plays up on the TV.
We
never got that.
Death, I was specifically thinking about that. I am one of the few people who A, owned a Wii U, and B, loved the Wii U. Mostly just because I liked playing Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance on the big screen, but also because I think the touchscreen was just nice to have. It is like a pre-Switch Switch. You can set it up in the little dock and play your games with the Wii remote while your parents are watching TV or whatever, right? Like it's kind of like that. So, but specifically with regards to Pokemon, yeah, I mean, like, having a main series Pokemon game on the Wii U would have made a ton of sense, right? And this is still why I think that for stuff like translating DS era games onto the Switch generation, thinking maybe in the Switch 2 the Switch 2 generation they'll have some sort of peripheral that acts as a touchscreen. Maybe it'll be your phone or something even. But main series games aside, and tying this back into earlier discussion points, I always thought that Wii U would be the perfect console for Pokemon Snap. Like a Pokemon Snap game. You've got the gyroscope controls, right? You can move around. Like, thinking about, how they used it in, like, Star Fox Zero, for example, and how crappy that was, and then thinking about how that would actually make sense in a game design, right? Snap is perfect for that. You're moving the gamepad around, looking for Pokemon, maybe using that as your camera lens to like zoom in. You can look on the top screen to get just like a generic, kind of layout, and then seeing a Pokemon in the distance, and then zooming in using the gamepad and taking the perfect shot. I feel like that's the perfect console for that.
And instead, all we got was what, Pokken? Did we get anything else? Poke Park Wii?
We got Pokemon Rumble U.
Yeah.
That was the one.
And Pocket Tournament, clear,
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't hate the Wii U. I just feel like, and as you just made all the good points, horrendously underutilized. So much potential, not used at all.
And before I jump to Abby, because there are so many great points being made, I just want to reach out to the chat, either on YouTube or Twitch. If you want a what happened to the Wii U and Pokemon cast, let us know, because that is something we could probably do in detail.
Oh, absolutely.
In fact, I'm loving that idea, and I gotta jot that down. But Abby, I'm gonna go to you.
Just to be clear, this is talking about Wii U.
Yeah, we're just doing a little deviation on Wii U. Do you have any opinions on that?
Not particularly. I mean, like, home console representation of Pokemon was already pretty limited, and so with the Wii U being as kind of not unpopular as it was, I don't think it's particularly surprising we didn't get much for it. Although I do wish what we did get was better. Like Rumble U especially, that game is bad. But I mean, like Pokken is interesting. And then they just thing with the Wii U is like all of the good, interesting Wii U games they ported to the Switch anyway. So like we got Pokken DX. That's I mean pretty much it in terms of Wii U Pokemon stuff that mattered. I mean I like Pokken. I think it was a very strange concept. So bringing it to the Switch was good just to get some more eyes on it, because with a install base as small as the Wii U, those really weird niche games kind of struggle to find an audience, and I think it did that more so on the Switch, although it still never got huge.
Right. I do want to make sure to follow through. Caps, has there been anything that we should shout out? Any questions, particular comments in the Twitch chat?
No specific questions. No, chat, if you guys want to ask any questions, feel free to post them. But a couple of interesting comments. Shark King says, I never even bought a Wii U. Smash 4 on the 3DS was good enough for me. Broken circle pad aside. And I will say that a lot of my time on the Wii U was, besides the time I spent like playing Fire Emblem on the big screen, was either in Smash 4 or Mario Kart 8. So I completely agree with you there. And then specifically regarding our previous point about graphical and performance issues within the Switch generation, Soapy says, TBH, I quite enjoyed Scarlet and Violet because of the performance issues. I just find it funny to look at. And that's an interesting point in itself. I wanted to actually ask you guys, did you ever have any interactions with any funny glitches in Scarlet and Violet? Like, there were plenty that had, like, viral videos going around on Twitter or whatever. But I was curious if you guys actually ran into any, because I didn't.
I ran into several issues, and I posted them on my Twitter every time they happened, but I can't think of anything in particular that sticks with me as, like, the big one that was like, oh, man, this is, like, the most amazing glitch. But, I mean, fair point. You know, you, as I said, you never know what you're going to get when you play Scarlet and Violet. So I guess that's maybe a point in its favor.
I will say one of my absolute favorites was when I was using Clodsire for a good chunk of my playthrough. And I started to notice that the trainer in Clodsire just started sinking deeper into the ground. And I went, oh, this is absolutely perfect, because Clodsire is just taking me down to his home. I didn't have a ton of massive glitches. I will go back to the fact that when stuff did pop up, I couldn't play for long. Just doing to getting dizzy and nauseous, which I will say is not fun for me because I usually play Pokemon for like 6 hours. But every time there was like a hilarious glitch, or like I threw a Pokeball and my character landed like 2 feet in front of Miraidon in the air, that was pretty cool. And I will also say I love the fact that flying Pokemon just stay in the air. That's pretty cool too. I thought that would have been interesting as an intentional thing. But Abby.
Yeah, I really didn't have a lot of particularly interesting glitches. It was mostly just frame rate issues for me, which I don't know if I would consider myself lucky or not because of that. On the one hand, like, yeah, it would have been nice to have some more interesting glitches that sort of made it worthwhile instead of just having bad frame rate and not much else. And because that really kind of highlights the bad performance without. Because I mean I've played a lot of Skyrim, which is not the greatest game in terms of how well it works, but like all the glitches in that game are hilarious, and so those really add to that experience. But I did not really experience much of that in Scarlet and Violet, which I'm a little sad about, because I saw all this funny stuff around, and for me it was just like, oh, my game runs at 4 FPS now.
there is one glitch I encountered several times, which I found to be very annoying, which was when you would be jumping with Miraidon, or whatever, ride Pokemon you have in the game. Um, and it would just get frozen in a jump animation. And then after about 30 seconds, the game resets you somewhere else. And it was like, hey, I was kind of there for a reason. It's not my fault that Miraidon couldn't find the ground beneath its feet. So that's probably the most consistent glitch I encountered.
One thing that I also would love to encourage the audience to do is let us know your crazy glitches with Scarlet and Violet. And if you want, I know that BDSP was also notorious for other things as well. Let us know what you got in the chat. And then Caps, now that I thought of this, Caps, were you the individual who was streaming Scarlet and Violet and made it a point to jump off of every high ledge?
I don't think that was myself. No, I think it was probably ME.
Okay. Might have been, yeah. I just wanted to shout that out because that's one of the coolest things that I remember from some of our previous casts. But is there anything else in the Twitch chat we should mention?
Well, we've got some funny glitch stories coming in. Sharking says, I literally fought an invisible Starly in Legends Arceus once, which I'm fairly certain has also happened to me on a number of occasions. In Scarlet Violet, too. Just several missing Pokemon. Soapy says, I got my shiny Ponyta sent to the Shadow Realm in PLA. KR says, I remember that time I fell into the void at the Great Crater, which is hilarious. And then Aragon Movie Bad says, which, by the way, fantastic username, says, I also fell through a Terra Crystal after loading a save on it. So clearly we have a lot of experience with many different glitches in all of these games.
Awesome. And then what I also want to do, and this is another prompt for the audience as well, if you're on YouTube or Twitch when we're either live or otherwise, because I think this is going to be one of the more fun aspects of it. And I'm definitely going to narrow this down because my initial question was way too specific for all of the games you got on the Switch. But I'm going to ask you, the cast, the audience, whoever, what were 2 or 3 of your favorite Switch era Pokemon designs? I am a diehard Clodsire fan, a diehard, I go all the way back to Alolan Ninetales being one of my favorite Pokemon, but there are a couple I have to highlight. Right now, the 2 that I am diehard fans of is Berserker in design and a beast in power. I love Galarian Rapidash. It's perfect. And I've got to mention, I haven't mentioned this one before, but Revavroom is one of my all-time favorite evolution lines of a poison type, and I can actually attribute Scarlet and Violet for making me fall in love with poison types since like Gen 1. But I would love to actually open that up to you, Caps. What are some of your favorite designs from the Switch era of Pokemon?
You caught me away from my computer. I was filling up water. My favorite designs from the Switch era of Pokemon. I will say that, in general, I think the Gen 9 original designs I like a little more than the Gen 8 ones. Stuff that comes to mind are Clodsire, Fido, Smoliv, Cerulege, as KR says in chat, as well as the designs of the legendaries. I do like both Miraidon and Koraidon, although I prefer Koraidon. Some paradoxes I like. Fluttermane, Screamtail, Iron Hands is funny. I just like, there are a lot of Scarlet and Violet Pokemon that I really, really do like the designs of. Including, actually, also, now that I'm thinking about it, all 3 of the first evolution starters are all really well designed. But I do think that Skeledirge takes the cake when it comes to final Evos. Thinking back to Galar, I would probably echo you with Galarian Rapidash being my favorite Galar Pokemon. And I'm really trying to remember. Oh, an honorable mention as well to Basque Legion and Sneasler in Legends Arceus. So just a few of my favorite designs. Although I would say I prefer the Scarlet and Violet designs better.
Right. And then Magnadeth. What about you?
So while you guys have been talking, I've actually been going through the entire national decks of the 8th and 9th generation and picking out my favorite designs. And there is a noticeable increase of my choices in Gen 9 over Gen 8. I can say from Gen 8, possibly my favorite Gen 8 Pokemon, not including Legends Arceus, because I just feel like it's like its own thing. But my favorite Gen 8 Pokemon is probably Scorch. Sizzlypede and Scorch are just plain cool. I like bug types. The fact that we got these, fire worms or centipedes, they're just cool. I just love their design. They just seem like silly guys too. And of Gen 9, I mean, obviously I'm going to go with Sandy Shocks because as a big Magnemite fan, seeing Sandy Shocks, I was like, holy cow, this thing is hideous. I absolutely love it. Like, it is one of the most disorienting looking Pokemon. It's an absolute mess. And on that measure, it's perfect.
I have a similar mentality to Center Scorch, and when it comes to Sandy Shocks, I have a similar mentality towards Garbodor. So I can appreciate that. Abby, what about you?
So I am on the other side of the fence from a lot of you in that most of my favorite Switch era designs are from Sword and Shield. In fact, it's a toss up, but it's pretty much tied for my favorite Pokemon of all time is Ice-Q. I love that penguin so much. And then Melmetal is up there, technically not from Gen 8 or 9, but Let's Go was a Switch game, so I'm counting it. And then also Duraludon is very high up there. That was actually I that one I started to like because of Unite, especially. That I've been playing as it in that game for a while, and that really warmed me up to it. But in terms of, I mean, Gen 9 definitely still has some great designs. A lot of the Paradox forms are great. Iron Valiant really stands out to me. And then Wiglet, I remember when that was revealed, and it just, I still love it so much. I used it on my original team, and it was overwhelmingly terrible to actually use, but that design is so fun.
I wanted to quickly jump in and say that, Abby, your point about Pokemon that you like because of Pokemon Unite, a Gen 8 Pokemon that I like a lot, not necessarily because I used it in Pokemon Unite, but because it just clued me in because it's also in Pokemon Unite, is Cramorant. I just think it's just really funny, especially in main Sword and Shield, where you can sometimes it'll grab like a Pikachu and spit the Pikachu out of the Pokemon or whatever. Cramorant, fantastic design. So yeah, there are a few other Sword and Shield Pokemon that I like.
There's actually, I want to go back to you, Caps, when you mentioned Skeledirge, which, let's be honest, Skeledirge is awesome. And it's so great to get another quadruped starter, let alone a fire-breathing alligator with a bird on its nose. And I actually wanted to touch... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Hawk, you mentioned River-Room. It was you that mentioned River-Room, right?
Which one?
River-Room?
Yes.
I also like River-Room, especially because I'm a car guy, so, car-based Pokemon, that's pretty cool. However, why does it float? Tell me, Game Freak, why does this Pokemon that is designed after a car and has a design that clearly has inspiration of wheels, it does not have levitate, why is it floating? I don't understand that.
Yeah. I will also shout out Skeledirge. I fell in love with Skeledirge not just because it's a monstrosity. but like just in terms of power, it is so good. But on top of that, I do want to also highlight one other Pokemon, which I think is not the most aesthetically pleasing, which is Archaladon, the evolution of Duraludon. Um, I absolutely fell in love with the fact that it's just a giant bridge. Not only is it obscenely powerful, but the fact that we got it like unofficially in Unova brings me a lot of joy, and it was really cool to see um, an evolution of a Gen 8 Pokemon so soon, and I it just makes it's so cool. And it really is just it's one of those things that I think it's pretty inventive. Um Anyways, I'm sure we could go on this. Um and I don't want to take up too much time, but I also want to check in. Is there anything else, like any special shout outs for Pokemon we've gotten in the Twitch chat?
We've got a few. Looking back, I've seen Toad School, Roaring Moon, Brute Bonnet, Quaquaval, the Dunsparce, and Mousehold. And I particularly want to give a shout out to Roaring Moon and Mousehold. I completely forgot about it.
Yeah, I would also like to follow up on Mousehold. I don't know how I didn't, but that is another one of my all-time favorites.
And going off of, I know we didn't have this officially mentioned, but since we were talking designs, I would love to ask all of you, what is your favorite Gen 8 gym leader, and what is your favorite Gen 9? Abby, you went last this last time, so I'd love to open up with you.
Yeah, I'm gonna just double check and make sure I see them so I don't miss anything. But yeah, Gen 8 is absolutely Alistair for me. I love him so much. And I still really like what Sword and Shield did with the version exclusive gym leaders. And yeah, Alistair is just a very fun design. Fits his type really well while still being an interesting character, despite his limited screen time. And then, I mean, like the easy answer for Paldea is obviously Larry, but I think Kofu is underappreciated. I really like his sort of chef aesthetic. And like how well he kind of incorporates his type into his design while still having it be fairly subtle overall.
And I just want to also say this is another opportunity for anyone in the comments section or chats. Please let us know. Really quickly, I'm actually going to name a couple of my favorites. So Kabu from Galar, I think, is one of my favorite gym leaders. Partly because I feel like his whole his whole gym puzzle was distinctly unique. And I'm a massive fan of the Centiskorch line, so that was really cool. Plus, he rocks an Arcanine. I love that Pokemon. And then Gen 9, I think again the easy answer is Larry, but I might go a little bit rogue here and gotta remember actual names here. I'm gonna go with bug type trainer. I can't remember her name. But
Katie?
like
Katie, I believe.
Katie, yeah. I just like the whole like Happy Baker aesthetic. I think it's really cool how they've utilized her, and I will say that she is right next to where I caught my first Mankey in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And Annihilate is a Pokemon that I've been waiting for forever. So that I have a special association with that town and that trainer. But Caps, what about you?
For me, I would have to say, thank you, Mag, for the hydrate. But I would have to say for Gowler, I'm gonna go with Piers, partially because I'm a fan of British rock music and the nod to kind of like just heavy like hair metal rockers is really appealing to me, but also because I like his vibe in general, that he's kind of like a counterculture guy who doesn't want to use Dynamax because, whatever, I can't remember his justification for it, but I remember it being really good. And I like his design a lot as well. And then in Gen 9, again, Larry is the obvious pick. If I had to choose someone other than Larry, though, and of course Rika doesn't count, unfortunately, because they're not a gym leader, but I would go with Grusha. I like them a lot. Their design is really cool. Their lore is really cool. Yeah. I will add that I will say that as a whole, the gym leader casts in 8 and 9, Gens 8 and 9, I would say are less memorable as a whole, like collectively. Although, like from previous generations, although I will say that there are quite a few standouts in both regions.
I think that is completely fair. I was actually trying to remember Grusha's name. I like that a lot. Magnadeth, what about you?
As far as Gen 8 goes, I'm surprised more people didn't say Nessa. I thought she was a really cool trainer. But I would probably also go with Piers. Cool guy. I also like, rock music. I also like how he doesn't use Dynamax, because maybe this will come up later in our discussion, but I really, really hate Dynamax. So I am 100% on board with his battle style. But as Sharking pointed out in the chat, he has a really awkward cutscene because there's no voicing, and he's singing, and we get nothing. That's something else we can touch on later in our discussion. But yeah, short answer, Piers. As far as Gen 9 goes, Larry is the obvious choice. He is the literal definition of a mood. But I can't, not shout out my girl Iono with, the Magnemite hair clips. So, and I also like how Iono has a really distinct personality. Yeah, she's kind of, streamer girl, but it's really different from what we had gotten in previous Pokemon games. It really shows that they were like, all right, let's really try to, connect, so to speak. It sounds kind of lame, but it felt different than you just show up in a town. Oh, I like these kind of Pokemon. Here, we're gonna fight. Instead, Iono is just like off the wall, and I can't help but laugh at that. And I will give just a quick aside that I also do think Grusha is underrated.
And so speaking of awkward moments, I don't know if they're fully hair clips, but speaking how you like the Magnemite line, I will say I don't know why Pokemon didn't throw something in with the different colored Magnemites in Iono's hair. I thought that could have been like a really cool nod, or at least a way to add in something a little bit more unique with just Magnemite. Obviously, we got Sandy Shocks, but as a Magnemite fan, what do you feel about that, Magnadeath?
I was very confused that, we have Iona's design came out, and I'm like, oh man, we're gonna get some, alternate form of Magnemite. I'm so excited. And when the pictures came out, I'm thinking, what's it gonna be, like electric fairy type? Electric. What's going on here? And then just to find out, like, a Pokemon themselves are like, don't worry, it's just it's just some crazy remote controlled, hair clips or whatever. I'm like, really? You put the effort in to make this unique little cutesy Magnemite design, and it's not even a Pokemon? Like, straight up, I was disappointed. I was disappointed and arguably a little bit mad. Don't get me wrong, love Sandy Shocks, but why give Iona these giant, iconic Magnemite hair pieces that are not in relation to anything whatsoever? Like, I just don't understand it.
And I think I think this is. I don't want to spend too much time on this, just for the sake of time and getting in some other topics. But I would really love to kind of break down Galar and Paldea specifically. We've got some touched on, like with the peers not singing. In fact, if I remember correctly, it's almost like static at some point. Um,
It's
not
generic
singing.
audience shouting.
That's definitely it. And I just want to touch on because I don't think we have time to go over the full aspect of Galar's story and Paldea's story, but for each region, what's like two of your favorite aspects of each region, two or three, and what are two or three of your least favorites? And I'll actually start this off. So I've got to I I really have a problem with the peers not actually singing. But I think the thing that bothers me most about that, and this is why it's one of my two, is how often they use peers singing. And there's just nothing coming out. I think it would have been a really cool time to add in voice acting or even just a song of some kind, because I will agree Piers is really cool and very unique. And the other thing that I really don't like about Galar, is it just so Galar I think has a lot of really unique biomes, some really unique areas. Um, but it felt so weird, and I can understand probably part of the reason why they didn't have 10-year-old going out to fight giant monster Pokemon. But I still find it so odd that so much of the story is cut to like the point of your character reacting to Leon jumping into the realm of chaos with just like, oh, it's over now, you can go. And then I will say a few highlights. I love the colors of Galar. There is some really unique stuff there. I love some of the designs, and I will say, I even though they didn't make the professor the queen of Galar, I really think it's cool how she has the Yorkie Pokemon. Couple downsides of Paldea. Again, I've mentioned several things, but I will say the other things I haven't mentioned, Aldea, I would have really loved to have had more culture. Not necessarily a ton, but it would have been really cool to interact with that a little bit more. I really wish the other aspect really would have loved some more life and the people. Outside of, towns and things, just so many people felt copy and paste. And two things I love about Paldea, it really is an innovative game, and I really like the idea of how, like, um, Koraidon were part of a centuries long introduction to riding Pokemon. I think that was really cool. And then I'll go to you, Magnadeath, even though you went last time.
As far as least favorite things about Galar, um, I will point out really quick. You were talking about the lack of voice acting with peers. That is a topic I feel like we could probably have together separately. I know this because I've asked several times on my Twitter, and it usually results in a pretty heated debate. So,
Okay.
all I'm going to say is I am strongly in favor of voice acting. We can come back to that later if you'd like. But my biggest problem with Galar is there just isn't a lot of stuff to explore. A lot of the routes are very direct, very linear. I can't think of any routes in which I went back later to check something out. Which, in contrast, I keep mentioning this going back to when I was playing Gen 1, 2, and even 3, is you'd go through a route and you'd be like, there's a body of water here, but I don't have surf. I'll have to come back later. Or a tree you can't cut down. You don't get that at all in Galar. You go through a route and you're done. So, in fact, the only notable thing that sticks in my head was before one of the caves is there's a ledge you can see. It's like, how do I get to this ledge? Well, you just go in the cave, take a left, and pings you over to that ledge, and you're done. So, Galar does have some cool designs. I think we can all agree that Balloon Lay, I think it's what it's called, is a gorgeous town. But that kind of leads to my second issue with Galar is that even in the towns, there just isn't a lot to do. You go to these towns, you do what you got to do, and you generally just leave. Like you pretty much only use Motostoke and yeah, one of those the early town, like the first town and the last town, and the rest of these places are just like just stopping points. Heck, Piers' town. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. Actually, I got it right in front of me. I can say it. Spikemouth, excuse me. Spikemouth is a giant side scroller. It's only used for the gym battle, and that's it. So, is it even really worth having a town in the first place? So, going back to what I said, positive points about Galar is there are some really unique, nice places. I think that I didn't actually get the chance to comment on the graphics earlier. I don't think that Sword and Shield looked very good. I think they look like a bad GameCube game in my opinion. But the aesthetic of it is pretty cool. Motostoke looks fantastic. Balloonlay looks fantastic. And Turffield I think looks fantastic. Those are just examples. There's a lot of good looking places. But I gotta go back to exactly what you said about how the story is constantly tugging at you. Is the biggest sticking point in my head was I don't remember the town. I actually think it is Motostoke. Is there's an explosion in the distance, and you as the player are approached by champion, what's his name, and girl scientist lady. I'm sorry, my brain is a little frazzled, but they run up to you and they're like, don't worry, we're going to take a look at this. You just keep on going doing gyms. It's like, you wouldn't do this in a previous Pokemon game. If there's a giant explosion, you go check it out. So why does the game keep pushing you off? And they keep saying like, you just focus on the gyms. You're too young for this. Like, that's not the point. As a 10-year-old, we took down Team Rocket twice. So, I would like to get on to my thoughts on Gen 9 and Scarlet and Violet, but I feel like that's probably going to take a little bit more time. So I'd actually like to give the floor to the other folks, and we can maybe come back to Gen 9.
Okay. Abby, what about you?
Yeah, so generally, one of the biggest downsides of both of these sets of games is kind of the technical aspects of them, but we've talked about that before, so I won't dwell on them for too long. One of the things that bothered me about Galar is just sort of the wild area was not engaging for me basically at all. I'm okay with open world games in general, but they really need to have something going on, and the wild area just did not have that. It was literally just, here are some fields of Pokemon, and that was basically, and there wasn't even really any biome diversity. Like, the most sandy area in the middle of the northern section, but like otherwise it's all just grass with like, there's sometimes some water and sometimes some big rocks. And then also I have a couple issues with the Pokemon distribution in that game. There's a lot of stuff that is particularly difficult to find on account of the weather system in the wild area. Like, I'm trying to remember. I was doing a mono psychic run on my own time a while back, and I was like, I really love Reuniclus. I would love to use that, and it only spawns like during foggy weather in one specific area. And it's like, well, that is annoying. Like, to have to hunt that down. So, and I know there have been kind of similar systems in some games in the past, but it was really exacerbated to a greater degree in Galar, which I didn't love. But on the plus side with Galar specifically, I do love pretty much all of the characters. I don't think the story is particularly great as a whole in terms of plot, but I think all of the individual characters are interesting enough, with maybe the exception of Rose. Like Sonia and Leon, like, yes, they are kind of doing a lot of the quote unquote plot for you, but your interactions with them on a more one-on-one basis are really interesting. I think what kind of makes the narrative of that game. And then in terms of Scarlet and Violet, I guess again, it's kind of a similar issue of just there being nothing going on, and this is sort of an issue with the open world nature of it. But it's like nothing can really be hidden. Like you think back to some of those older games, and there's this thing like tucked away, and it's like it's very hard to do that when most of the stuff is just kind of wide open. And we did get some caves, especially in the DLC, that helped with that. Give the areas a little more texture, but on average, that was one of my issues, and it did help. A lot of that was nice in terms of the new Pokemon to find that, but once you hit that, then there's really nothing else, and there's no item in Pokemon that's exciting enough to justify going out of your way for most of the time. But then I think on the plus side, like I talked about narrative a little bit with Sword and Shield, but I think Scarlet and Violet arguably have the best plot of a Pokemon game. I know some people would put that on something in Gen 5. I'm not the biggest Gen 5 fan. But regardless, like I think most people can agree that like Scarlet and Violet really nailed its narrative in a lot of interesting ways, and the DLC just kind of added to that. And so I appreciate that, even as someone who doesn't typically care about the story when it's good. I definitely noticed it and appreciated that.
Awesome. I do want to look at our time. So there are a couple things, and at this point in the cast, I would also love to invite anyone in the chat. Let us know if you have an interest in a 2.0 version of the talk, because there's so much more that we can get into that we just don't have time now, for the sake of our cast, for the sake of our audience. But there's so much that we can discuss. We are also hoping and maybe doing some other retrospectives closer to whatever the Switch 2 is. But as we begin to wrap, I'd love to know that from the audience. And I have a couple more questions planned, but I do want to give you a little bit of time, Caps, if you would be willing to share, or we can also move on to other questions.
Sure, I'll go quick. I'll touch on a couple of things that were said by you and Abby. And Death, actually. I think it was actually Death and Abby. The first thing I want to say is the route design in Galar. I think that, I completely agree that it is, rather linear, not much to explore. And even considering, because trying to think about, having a linear route is not a bad thing, right? But, considering another generation, actually 2 generations of games that did have more linear routes, Gen 5 and Gen 6. In both of those games, the route design is very linear, but there are also, you as the player are given the choice to go and explore these areas, these extra little bits of areas, like Death was saying, behind a tree, or maybe you take a turn into the grass instead of following the path, and all of a sudden there's a maze. That happens multiple times in X and Y on multiple routes. But I mean, giving the player the option to search for those extra explorable areas, I think is something that Galar lacked and would have really benefited from. And the second point that I quickly wanted to make is there was some discussion earlier about Pierce's the pre-battle concert or whatever being the most notoriously obvious example of a situation where Pokemon could use voice acting. I would personally like to throw my hat in the ring for the literal opening cinematic of Sword and Shield, where it's Chairman Rose in the middle of a packed stadium, getting ready to commentate the biggest match known to man between Leon and Raihan, right? And he's like nothing is coming out of his mouth. It's so funny to me. It's This is a packed stadium. Your voice should be booming through the rafters at the very, very top of the stadium, and there's just nothing. I remember after opening up the game, popping into my Switch, sitting there in my dorm room college sophomore year, and just laughing. Just freaking laughing at just like how silly it was. I was like, Kukui was silly in Sun and Moon, but not this silly. Like, you know what I mean? Anyway, I digress.
They did it again.
Yeah,
Violet.
They did.
I kind of let go of the floor. So let me just cover my thoughts on Gen 9 real quick, because honestly, they're kind of the same opinions. The game still severely what's the word? It's hindered by its lack of voice acting, because we have these scenes of big important moments happening and there's no emotion. There's no talking, so you just kind of have to assume what people are thinking and sounding like. Which I get it. You know, we've been playing that game, playing that way for years. But you know what I can't really imagine is a ghost type gym leader rapping to me. Why is that not? Why did I not do that?
Yeah.
Like, everybody made fun of them for peers, and then they did it again. So, you know, again, the whole voice acting topic, it would be a great thing to do in our day. I am 100% on board that we should have voice acting in Pokemon. And just to cover my ups and downs of Scarlet and Violet, I also big agree with I believe it was Abby that said it, is some of the story elements in Scarlet and Violet are fantastic. And that's coming from somebody who has played and loves Gen 5. I do love the story of Gen 5. The story elements of Scarlet and Violet are also absolutely fantastic. We've got fantastic characters. We got some great writing. The dialogue is great. It's even more disappointing we don't get it voiced. So, yeah, you know, and we have multiple stories in Scarlet and Violet. You know, with the multiple different things we can do. So, but one of my biggest issues with Scarlet and Violet, other than the performance, of course, is the same thing I said with Sword and Shield, but not so much linear routes. It's the lack of any semblance of direction of routes. Also, kind of mirroring what Abby and I believe Cap said, is you can have an open world, but you have to, you know, fill it with something. And there's nothing to do out there except for get Pokemon, which, you know, I get it's a Pokemon game, but and don't get me wrong, I like exploring. You know, I've played my fair share of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, quite a bit actually. But the point I want to make is that the way, if you look at a map of Paldea, it would actually be really easy for them to have cordoned off areas per progress and still give you an open world. And it would have, I personally feel it would have made the game so much better, because you would have this nice contained area to sort of find new Pokemon, you know, get used to the Pokemon you got training, and then when you're ready, you tackle the gym or Team Star or whatever, and you can move on to the next area. And when you're all done, you've got the whole map unlocked. But instead, they just throw you out there, and if you want to go fly to the 8th gym and tackle it after getting your starter, go for it. Well, you won't fly, you'd run. But yeah, my biggest issue with Scarlet and Violet, other than the performance, is it is not linear enough. So I sound like one of those people who can't be pleased. I'm like, you know, this is too linear. All right, here's open world. This is not linear enough. But, you know, I still feel, you know, my points are valid in that respect, where, you know, Gen 8, there's like no exploration. Gen 9, there's almost, I don't want to say too much exploration, because again, there's nothing to really explore. It's just an open world. But yeah, the lack of progression combined with the open world, it breaks any reasoning for the open world, is kind of the point I'm making.
Well, and I think there are so many little topics that have been touched on from, you know, is voice acting, like we could have an entire cast on would voice acting be good for Pokemon, to I mean, one that I've personally been thinking about for a while is what is happening to evil teams, because I actually like the somewhat trick that the Pokemon Scarlet Violet played on making people think Team Star was actually going to be evil instead of just misunderstood kids. There are so many little things, so many ideas. So in the chat as well, especially if we are wrapping up, please provide suggestions. If you're on YouTube, please provide comments, because we are opening this world up to these casts and getting so many ideas. Just for the sake of time, I've got one last question for everyone, because we've been going for a little while. And that is, do you feel like you are going to return to the Switch 3 years from now and play these old games? It can be as simple as yes, no. You can elaborate for a little bit, but I'm going to go to Abby on this first.
I definitely think I will come back, but I don't have as strong of an opinion about them as I do about a lot of the older games. Like, I come back to the 3DS games all the time because those games, they just have something different about them. I think it does kind of come down to, I just generally prefer sort of the more linear style of the older games, and so for that reason, I think, like, I've said this to a couple people before, but for like Legends Arceus specifically, it's like that was a game that I really quite enjoyed for my first playthrough and have no desire to come back to. And I don't feel quite that strongly about some of the other ones, but I definitely have a similar sentiment. Just the fact that, like, yes, I like these games, but playing through them again, because of kind of the open world nature, makes them a bit more of a slog than those other games, simply because those worlds are so empty, but they take up so much of the time of a given playthrough.
All right, and I'm going to go to Magnadeath. I know we have a couple comments from the chat, so I want to make sure to get to those. So I will give up my time, but I want to make sure to go to you, Death.
It's pretty easy for me to be quick on this one because I don't really have a desire to go back to Sword and Shield anytime soon, and I wouldn't mind going back to Scarlet and Violet, but it's got to be with more performance. So I would like to see how those games run on the Switch too, see if that improves it at all. If it does, yeah, I might go back and give them, play them again. But otherwise, I can't. I literally can't. They are too uncomfortable to play.
All right. And then to honor our audience on YouTube, Twitch, wherever you are, Caps, I know we have a few things that are in the chat, and I want to make sure to give time to those.
Real quick before I do quickly want to answer that last question, if that's okay. Briefly, and I think Soapy brings up a good point, is, yes, I will come back to these games just like every other Pokemon game. I feel the same way. Pokemon is my comfort food, and it's a game that I feel like, I can pick up and I can just play, when, my undiagnosed ADHD brain just needs something to do with my hands. It's like muscle memory at this point. I know what to do. It doesn't take much thought. Of course, I'm going to come back to these games at some point. Will I come back to them in the near future? Now, that is a different question that I think the answer is probably no. And part of this is, even including Scarlet and Violet in this as the most recently released games, I simply just, I think part of it, and this is just like a personal thing, is I streamed Scarlet and Violet so much for some of our charity marathons that it's like, I've already replayed them in a sense, So it's like, there's no real reason for me to come back. Now, Legends Arceus, on the other hand, I really enjoyed the gameplay, and there's much more of a chance of me, doing multiple playthroughs of that game. But as for, Scarlet Violet and Sword and Shield, probably not for the near future. But I digress.
I didn't mention Arceus, but yeah, I would gladly go back to Legend Arceus.
Last but not least, question from Soapy in the chat. And this is an interesting one that I didn't really think about until they mentioned this. What do you guys feel about a lack of a victory road in either, Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet. I'm fairly certain Sword and Shield didn't have a victory road, did it?
It didn't technically. Some people consider Route 10 to sort of be victory road, but it's definitely nowhere on the level of past games.
And I think to add to that, I think Scarlet and Violet had like a really brief like clip passage to the Victory Road with like a long trail where there were a couple trainers, but yeah, adding to Abby, I don't think there was really much. I will say to add to that, I kind of feel like depending on where you were level wise, the final quote unquote bosses of the game were meant to be in Scarlet and Violet, just like a combined victory road to kind of like send you off on the harder battles. That's my personal belief. And I kind of like that idea of like I can battle these as I want and have that victory feeling. But I would also say I'm not always the biggest fan of classic victory roads just because of like all of the like before the like calling a Pokemon to be your HM Pokemon, like some of them were just so tiresome to get through. And I understand they're puzzles, but like I didn't like having to have Flash and lose one of my key Pokemon, and then Surf and Waterfall and all of that, if that makes sense to everyone.
It definitely makes sense to me.
Yeah.
In fact, if you want, I can give you my opinion, considering I can tell you from personal experience is, do I miss Victory Road? I've played all the games, and I started with Gen 1. I can tell you the Gen 1 Victory Road is one of the worst experiences of Gen 1. I absolutely hate Victory Road in Kanto. Yeah, for those who don't know, you need a Pokemon that uses Strength, so you can push a bunch of boulders onto some buttons, so you can unlock the further to get further in the dungeon. That would be fine-ish if you weren't also being constantly bombarded by wild Pokemon the entire time. Yeah, you could use a Repel, obviously, but you've also got a bunch of trainers to deal with, and Gen 1, the game doesn't alert you when your Repel wears off, so you have to just kind of guess and then reapply it. Or no, actually, it tells you when it wears off, but it doesn't give you the chance to reapply, I'm sorry, like the newer games do. And then Gen 2, Victory Road is pathetic. It's just a cave that you just walk through, there's no trainers, and then you leave.
Yeah, because Silver beat them all.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you make a good point. I never thought about that. You make a good point. The path to Victory Road I felt was always more interesting. Climbing up Route 26 in Gold, Silver, and Hard Gold, Soul Silver is actually a really nice moment of that game because you're traversing various terrains. You got some grass, you got some water, and there's some hard trainers on the way. You know, it's a very interesting part of the game. And then you go into Victory Road, and it's just a cave. So, do I miss Victory Road? Not really. But if they could do it right, then I'd be on board with it. But no, I don't really miss it, to be honest.
And then Caps, you want to give your opinion on that really quick?
I quickly mentioned it in chat. I don't necessarily think that having a strict victory road fits well with the open world design philosophy of Scarlet and Violet, especially the way that they do it, where you can do any of the 3 major quest lines in any order, and you can even do like a full one before you even finish any of the others if you want. And having like something at the end to like quote unquote test you at that point, I feel like kind of it doesn't fit well with that design philosophy. I do think that like having some sort of end game area makes sense, like with the Paldean Crater, but like the Paldean Crater doesn't necessarily test you in the same way that Victory Road used to. It's more just like an area to kind of pull all the story threads together, tie it all up, and kind of like, I don't know, put the finishing touches on the game, I guess, rather than a strict Victory Road. Although I do think Victory Road kind of peaked with Gen 5. I really like the Gen 5 Victory Road a lot. So I'm not too pressed with it leaving, but it's an interesting point that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I never actually thought about it.
And is there anything else that we should highlight?
Looking.
Somebody said something I wanted to comment on. Let me
go for
scroll
it,
up
Death.
here. KR Black said, "Let me save the world again." So I kind of disagree-ish, because I still love the classic taking down Team Rocket storyline. I don't feel as though every game has to be taking down the world. In fact, I would actually kind of appreciate a little bit. I don't want to say lower stakes. That's not a good way of putting it. But stopping a criminal organization that's trafficking in Pokemon and stealing from people, I feel like that's a pretty reasonable thing to do. So yeah, I don't really. The point I'm trying to make is I don't think every game needs to have a more chill. That's kind of a way to put it. Ish, yeah. Every game does not need to have this "the world is going to end and we have to stop it" mentality. And I feel like that's not going to happen, if I'm honest, because every game wants to pump in as many powerful legendaries as they can, which they always tie into the story, which even that's not like the worst thing, but I mean, we had I liked the Team Rocket storylines, and both of them combined didn't involve any legendaries. So, yeah.
And I will add to that, and because I mentioned this a little bit ago, part of the reason I love the Team Star storyline in Scarlet and Violet is because it's such a subversion. Like, they got marketed, I think, mostly by the fans as like the quote unquote evil team. There was some hinting to things, but the thing I love about Team Star is they basically played off of that and went, "Oh, you think they're the evil team," and played off like people's biases in school. And the quote unquote evil team were kids that were labeled evil because they stood up for themselves in a unique way. And the fact that it really just boils down to they were just trying to protect themselves and protect their friends from toxicity and hostility in school, I think was a really interesting thing to play with. And I think there's a lot of heart within that. And I think if you're not going to have Save the World, you can at least have an interesting storyline that makes you think about each of the people and why they're in the story.
I agree. And actually, as Sharking mentioned here in the chat, is there's like a hint of the whole like Save the World thing, but it also wasn't it wasn't in your face. It wasn't really necessary, but at the same time, I don't think it hurt it too much. I think that Scarlet and Violet were more about, as you said, the people, and as opposed to everything else where we're all gonna die. We have to stop it. Only you can stop it. And I'm like, really? Only us?
Cool.
So,
And to add to that, I would also say like the reveal of like the actual villain in the series and the connection to Arven. I mean, the game's been out for a while. People probably played it. I'm sure everything is out there. But the fact that like an automaton had more humanity than Arven's family is like a jarringly biting commentary on a lot of things in society. And the way they played it out was just beautiful. And I will say, going back to the Great Crater Paldea, that is a creepy area to descend down. Like, they did a beautiful, beautiful job with like the shift in emotional tone leading up to that.
and the music really hammers that point home too.
Well, and just having like random giant monsters walking around doesn't help either. Like it was a really solid ending to a game. And I
Mhm.
know we don't have time to go into like the DLC. I actually want that to be a whole other cast as like a DLC discussion. But there was some solid stuff in about people in the DLC too. Which again, I want that to be a whole other discussion. But I know we're at that 2 hour mark. I do want to give anyone else who has a comment that should be highlighted some time.
While we're waiting for those comments to possibly come in, KR Black says, "I wish we could interact more with the people of Paldea." Also agree. I think that kind of bolsters whoever earlier said that we wish we could go back inside houses in Paldea.
No,
You
that
know,
was me. Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of fun to just walk into somebody's house and be like, "Hey, how you doing?"
I think that's my biggest gripe with like the NPCs who aren't of note in cities. It's just they could have done some really neat stuff with people just interacting with each other. And Pokemon's not always been great with like just random characters doing really cool stuff on the side. But I think there's like I still say to this day that giant realtor building um in Iono City could have been a massive story point because it just had like massive evil team vibes, and they just left it um as something you couldn't even access.
The buildings. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, go ahead.
The This was also something touched before I didn't get a comment on, but the towns of Paldea have really nice designs, but they're all also quite lifeless, and it's just kind of exactly what we're all saying here is there's just no personality to these places. They just feel like they plopped them down. Ionis town, exactly as you mentioned, this big giant building, and I thought, oh man, something cool's gonna happen here. Nah, nothing happens.
Um And I know we didn't want to go more than 2 hours. I want to give a couple seconds just in case anyone else wants to comment. What I will say though is we are planning on doing these casts monthly, and we always welcome some suggestions in the comments and ideas. We're already working on some of the more awesome ones we've gotten. Um, but I want to just give one more shout out to everyone who has commented. We've got some great discussions off of it. And then, Caps, if there's nothing else I should highlight, I think we should probably call it just for the sake of everyone listening and for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rode. Do you want to go through and we can outro ourselves out? Starting with Death?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll start with you, Magnadeath. Please let us know what you're excited about, where you want people to reach out to you, as well as an outro. And I'm gonna do one of my traditional cheeky questions. And this is gonna be a little bit of a new one. Galarian Rapidash or Alolan Marowak, which do you prefer?
Oh man, that's a hard question. They're both really good. Oh man. I would have to say hmm. Wow, you picked like two of the best ones.
That's why
Uh,
it's cheeky.
I am going to every fiber of my being wants to pick Marowak because it's just a awesome design. But the battle hardened person that I am probably wants to go with Rapidash because I think it's a more viable Pokemon. So based solely on the fact that I think it's easier to use, I'm gonna go with Rapidash.
Right. And then I'm also going to do just a quick note. I am Roadhawk. It's a really hard choice. I am going to go down to just just based on how much more experience I have with it and how key it has been in so many of my teams. I'm going to go with I'm gonna say Alolan Marowak, partly because I've always loved that line, partly because it's a staple in my Alolan teams. I do also want to highlight one thing on my end. On Bulbagarden's channel, I do the Pokemon Masters shorts that have been up on, oh goodness, Wednesday and Sunday. I also know that Caps is going to highlight some other projects going on Twitch and YouTube, but I do also want to highlight ME's BDSP run, which has got some really awesome stuff there. And I also want to say, like always, leave comments, leave questions, interact with us. We will do more of these in the future. But Caps, I'm going to leave you as the last person. Same question.
Thanks, Road. First, I guess I can outro out a bit, and then I'll answer because I need some time to think. My name is the Caps Fan. Once again, you can find me here on Twitch. I stream on Bulbagarden every Thursday night and Saturday morning, so you can catch me live tomorrow morning with some Mystery Dungeon. I also stream on my own personal channel. You can find that in the About page. Follow me on Twitter at thecapsfanVMGF. And then to answer the question, Alolan Marowak or Galarian Rapidash, I have to go with Galarian Rapidash because I did say earlier that it was my favorite Galarian Pokemon, and if I didn't go with it, then I would look like a inconsistent fool. So there you go. Although I do like Alolan Marowak as well, specifically the Fire Trial is what comes to mind when I think of that one. But yeah, thank you guys for watching on participating in the chat on Twitch. Be sure to leave a like on the YouTube if you're watching there.
I didn't get to do my outro.
Oh, well, crap. Never mind. Death, where can people find you? Excuse me.
This guy knows I hate Chikorita, so he's trying to cover me up.
Exactly. It's all part of the plan.
And hey, before I give my outro, I will say, hey guys, I went the entire stream without complaining about BDSP even once. That's I didn't think it was gonna happen.
I'm so proud of you.
I know, right? So yeah, I'm on. Thank you very much. I'm on Twitter at Magnadeth. I'm also on Blue Sky at Magnadeth, and I'm on Twitch at Magnadeth. I stream Wednesday nights. Currently, I'm streaming Persona 4 Golden, but we are looking to see if I'll stream some more. So maybe keep an eye out for that.
All right, that is also my fault. I just carrying over from Caps. I do want to say thank you to everyone in the comment section one more time. The other thing I do want to note is we have some really cool summer projects we are working on as well, and they very well may tie into some future Pokemon games. We'll do a little teaser there. And I just also want to, because I forgot to do this as well, I want to thank Magnadeth, Abby, and Caps for being on here, and Caps being like our quote-unquote producer. With that, though, I hope everyone has a great night or day or morning wherever you are in the world. And one more thing I do want to do, because I've noticed this on YouTube, I do see that there are more and more people showing up on YouTube and supporting us. So I want to say for our YouTube community a special thank you, and thank you for your interest in these Bulbacasts as we port them over as well. Is there anything else you want to say, Caps?
No, go ahead and tune into my stream tomorrow morning. Also tomorrow we've got Archaic doing some Pokemon Ranger in the evening, and Donnywin's doing some sketching in the evening as well after that. So yeah, that's all I got.
All right. Well, everyone, gotta catch 'em all. We'll see you next time.
Cheers, y'all.
See ya.